In this episode, I was very fortunate to sit down with Daphne Seybold. I know we don't typically create introductions for our episodes, but I think this was going to be very important for this episode. Daphne's journey in the fashion industry is nothing short of remarkable. As the former communications executive for the iconic Dover Street Market and Comme des Garcons, she has been at the forefront of shaping fashion narratives. Today, Daphne is now channeling her expertise as a co-founder of Sky High Farm Universe. This isn't just any fashion brand. It's a pioneering business model that seamlessly blends commerce with social responsibility. Sky High Farm Universe operates on a unique for-profit model, where 50% of profits are dedicated to supporting its nonprofit sister organization, Sky High Farm. Essentially, it uses a for-profit business model to help fund and support a nonprofit food sovereignty and regenerative agriculture organization. In this episode, we're going to unravel the layers of Sky High Farm Universe's business model. How does a fashion brand effectively help to fund and support a nonprofit focused on larger scale world problems? How does this model challenge the status quo in the luxury fashion space? And perhaps most intriguingly, how can fashion be a catalyst for cool, socially conscious movements, especially around issues that are crucial yet often overlooked? Our conversation with Daphne Seybold is more than just a discussion. It's a case study of how fashion's allure and influence can be harnessed for meaningful change. A case study on using fashion as a powerful tool in solving larger world problems. Without further ado, let's get into the episode. Daphne, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for being on.
Thanks for having me, Esteban.
My pleasure. Let's see. Let's get this conversation officially started. After how long have we been sort of like going back and forth? A couple of months already now.
We started the company in January of 22. So a little shy of 2 years. Feels like a lifetime, but really hasn't been all that long. And I actually formally started within the brand myself in March, so a few months later.
Interesting. And could you give us a very brief introduction of, who you are and what you do, just so the listeners at home are very well aware of who they're going to be learning from?
Sure. So my name is Daphne Seybold. I am the co-founder, co-CEO, and CMO of Sky High Farm Universe, which is a brand that was built to generate fundraising and advocacy for the work of the nonprofit Sky High Farm. I'm a big part of my identity, I think, is intersectional, in that I grew up in Canada and Asia. I was schooled in the British system, went to university in California at a big state school, and then moved to New York, and then was later privileged to travel extensively to Japan and to Europe for work. And really prior to, my time at Sky High, I was with the leading retail leader, Dover Street Market, and Comme des Garcons, which is a leading fashion house, for almost 15 years, where I was heading up their marketing and communications.
Interesting. And how has the last couple of years since, transitioning from more of an executive role to what you do now as a CEO and founder, essentially, how has it changed your perception of who you are? So before, I guess you would describe yourself as a fashion executive that specialized in marketing and communications.
Sure.
But how would you describe yourself now? Or I guess a better way to ask the question would be, how would you describe yourself before, and how would you describe yourself now?
Well, I think the one of the primary differences was that I was communicating and interpreting the goals and messaging of a company with, a codified DNA and point of view. The way communications worked at Comme des Garcons and Dover Street was very much, we had a founder and a president in Ray Kawakubo and Adrian Jaffe, respectively. And over decades of work, they'd established a very clear sense of what the company was, its norms, the things that it wanted to promote. Whereas I think now in this particular role, we're essentially building an unknown company where there is no pre-established history, legacy, the amount that Kawakubo and Adrian did in their decades of setting up the company. A lot of that is entered into the sort of cultural register. And here I am now having to build something, from the ground up, that for which the foundation I think is strong, but needs to be articulated. Everything is new. I will say that it's been tremendously exhilarating in that I love building things. I love the idea of galvanizing, whole industry to participation in something new. So much of what I learned at Comme des Garcons in Dover Street was about trying to materialize the outcomes that we wanted, questioning the status quo and the reason why things were done in a particular way, and really sort of understanding the rules and then how to break them. And I think I've carried that through to, this particular company. And I would pause also to add that, Dan Colin, my partner, is an artist, and he's really built a career around establishing, or rather looking at pre-established norms and hierarchy and breaking a lot of those rules too in his artwork. So, I think it's been a tremendous sort of learning curve, but is informed by, I think, a history and background in sort of questioning the way things are done and how we can pull levers within existing systems to create new outcomes. I will also say that I love with entrepreneurship that there's the ability to be flexible and responsive in real time. Whereas obviously when you're working with a larger company, there are many more sort of layers and steps that are taken. Whereas with, a new brand, for which an identity is not yet established, we can really sort of listen very closely to what's happening on the ground and, generate responses that I think, tackle what's happening in real time. I think the other thing is really as it relates to talent and the types of people that have come into the fold. Whereas, Comme des Garcons in Dover Street, was established business, very self-selecting type of person wanted to work at these two very renowned companies. In my case, no one knows who Sky High Farm Universe is or what it is. And I find that a lot of the people that have been attracted to working with us have sought us out through their own research and passion. They are people that previously held jobs in industries that were very much formed, and that maybe see that they'd like to see things done in a different way, or are interested in applying their skill set, in a different way. Or perhaps they're even tired of the status quo and see that we can provide a real opportunity for agency amid systems that we view often as being broken or sort of less productive than they were originally set out to be. I'll pause there.
Interesting. Wow. No, very interesting. So in essence, everything that you've done throughout your career and everything that you're doing now can be summarized in identifying what is the current landscape, what might be potential solutions to things that we want to create. And yes, the only thing that's changed is the business models, the visions, and the infrastructure around that skill or vision or whatever you want to call it.
Yes. And I would also argue that, we're living through such an epochal moment as it relates to the issues of our time. And I don't think it was that they were any less important, these issues, when I was, in my former role. But I do think now they're very much at the forefront. And I think that as any sort of responsible business is being built, there's a different type of communication that's required. I think on a daily basis, we're really kind of propelled by a sense of urgency. There's a much stronger need for transparency, empathy, and I think, to assume the role of a leader at a time that's very, very fraught. Mm-hmm. I think also the one thing that this brand allows us to do is to communicate through action, right? Both in our deeds, the projects that we undertake, the partners that we form dialogue with, but also our constitution. So how we structure the company so that it is representative of our goals and values, as opposed to being an entity that exists to make things and then apply perhaps meaning after the fact, or, as it's more traditionally done, organizing marketing initiatives or other sort of pillars that seem to always follow the sort of stated aim of selling. We're really geared towards creating a structure that supports a mission first and foremost. The way that we do that is almost, it doesn't matter, right? We really see our products as vessels, things that allow us to engage with people, to communicate our larger goals, which are to support the work of Sky High Farm, the nonprofit, and to propose a new model for business and how business can be done in the world with a more philanthropic or beneficent constitution in mind.
Of course. So you start by identifying the problem, not worrying how to get there. Worrying how to get there starts after you identified a problem that you think you are able to solve or that you feel passionate enough to solve.
Yes.
Interesting. And I'm guessing it's interesting how the dynamic with, identifying problems work, because I think that, and I can relate with this to obviously a very, very smaller degree to you, but I think that the more you develop yourself as a human or in your career, the more you become, I guess, confident in your ability. And the more confident in your ability you become, the higher the sense of duty that you feel to solve problems that you identify, right? So when you're younger, you look at the world and you look at the problems that are going on, and you're a viewer, right? You just view the problems, you identify them, but you don't understand there's anything that you can do to solve them. And yes, obviously, the more you progress in your career, the clearer you can identify very specific problems, and the higher the sense of duty that you feel in order to solve them.
Yeah, I think the longer you're immersed in systems, the more you understand how much they're broken. But you also, I think, through experience, understand which levers you can pull, right? I think for us, what's allowed us to build the brand at a very expeditious clip is that we have entered into spaces, i.e. fashion, right, that we have knowledge of already. We understand the intricacies, the complexities, how corporate institutions function, their ESG goals, their stated priorities. And so I think that we're able to offer people an understanding their sort of makeup, where change is possible. I think one primary difference too, and I felt this very much as a younger person, is, we're all experiencing emotions around what's happening in real time, and we have a desire to act, but people often without means or opportunity are deprived from participating in the work and becoming agents of action in the work. And I think what we're trying to propose here is that we see what we believe is the issue of our time, and that there is actually a way to engender participation in everyone in this work. We want to provide that opportunity, that vehicle, that access where people have been unable to and are so used to having to sit as passengers on a ride, watching things unfold without having any real kind of input into outcomes. I think we really try to provide that space for customers, but really people I see as being part of creating solutions to large-scale outcomes we hope to see in the world. There's no doubt, though, that the sense of responsibility that you accumulate over time grows, but you start to understand also with age comes hopefully some wisdom, but more importantly, I think the privilege, because most of the people I know are in a position now to actually actualize change within their organizations. They have decision-making power. They know how budgets are spent and where money can be put forward to compelling projects. And so really, especially as we've begun in the fashion industry, so much of how we've started is for us to sort of look to our peers and to say, listen, we understand what you're trying to accomplish. Here's what we're trying to accomplish. We hope there's some alignment, and that you see a way for us to synergistically partner so that we can create new outcomes for both parties that ultimately service a greater good.
Of course. Yeah. So an experienced founder, an experienced person has the duty to solve a problem and to make people that want to be part of that solution available, to have ease of availability for people that want to be part of that solution. And that's essentially what a business is. Because
Yes.
I think that people don't look at businesses that way, especially, luxury, far from it. People look at luxury and look at fashion as, fashion products and what you buy. But I think that coming from a communications and marketing perspective, you can appreciate that one of the most important things that this industry brings to the table is the ability to communicate and create movements around specific problems.
Yes.
And I guess that's where your sense of duty comes from, because you were able to identify a problem that was very deep to you, very personal to your life. You had the skills to make that problem or potentially build a solution for that problem. You had all the leverage, you had all the contact network, and you have the opportunity to bring people together in order to solve that problem that want to be a part of that problem, but don't have the tools, the infrastructure, the experience to do so.
Yes. Yes. And I would also add, I've now spent a fair amount of time in the relatively short lifespan of the brand, enmeshed in the worlds that we're entering into. And it's funny because so often, you step into a space, regenerative farming, right? Where we understand, or it's our belief rather, that, this kind of farming can help to restore the earth, replenish it. It can also help to actively combat, the problems wrought by big industrial agriculture, in the face of climate change. And it's interesting because I think that, now having spent some time around problem solvers in these spaces, many of them are sort of focused on very specific parts of the problem. And in some scenarios, people are operating in silos, right? So they are committed individuals who have identified a problem at hand, and that it needs action, right? And they're devoting their time, their resources, intelligence to that. But I'm struck by how few people are thinking about systems holistically. I was at a regenerative farming summit, in September, and there was no shortage of committed individuals there, both from a financial perspective and capital perspective through to producers. But very few people talked about equity in the system, right? And what it means to power regenerative farming work, which we all agree has tremendous benefits for the planet. But to see everyone operating in silos and not considering the totality of the industry was interesting to me. But I also think that when you look across the industries that we've chosen to enter into, fashion, retail, food and beverage, wellness and beauty, industries that have trillions and trillions of dollars attached to them, and consumption is obviously something that's never going away. I'm sort of struck by how little sort of interconnectedness or horizontality there is between these industries in a dialogue around regenerative agriculture. So thinking about the raw materials that each of these industries draws on, right, and identifying that they're all deeply interconnected systems, but that everyone's tackling these problems in their individual spaces only, I think will never then succeed in instituting large scale systemic shifts? I'm sure I've missed the question at this point, but
No, not at all. Not at all. I think it's still quite clear. It's about identifying, because one of the things that I find most fascinating about what you're working on is, again, you had a vision of a problem that you needed to solve, which was regenerative agriculture. You had your background experience in fashion, so you're developing a business model around fashion that you understand. You understand how to build, you understand how to communicate, and you're finding ways to connect the benefits from that business model into the challenges that need to be solved in the regenerative farming space. And I understand what you're saying, that the fascinating thing about approaching it from that perspective is that you've learned how to analyze industries that might be completely different to what you're accustomed to and you have a background on, with an entirely new perspective, because you are in a way learning something from scratch, and you have the benefits of learning something from scratch. Again, the clear creativity that is required to solve very ambitious problems. And sometimes when you have a lot of experience and you understand everything that can go wrong, you don't pursue the problem, you don't pursue solving those problems with as much motivation and freshness and energy as you were starting to solve a problem as a child. But at the same time, you have the teams, the expertise, and the knowledge of something that could potentially solve that problem. So you're getting both the worlds, essentially.
Yeah. And I will say, like, we're not really interested in taking on a large footprint, right? Like, there are so many people in the world who are experts in their businesses that have figured out economies of scale and are doing it more sustainably, more responsibly, more ethically. And so where on the sort of creative and ideation side, we have our team, we also seek out partners who are born out of a particular moment in time, which is, i.e., in most of their cases, they're trying to solve for a lot of the issues they've seen in the industries that they've come up in. And so I think partnering with experts, being able to minimize the amount of space the brand takes up, but also understanding how we can marry sort of this creative lens with their total understanding of the industry, has been actually one of the most stimulating and exhilarating parts of this journey. These are people that long before Dan and I created the brand were actively doing this work. And it's funny because the one sort of hardship I think a lot of these businesses face is they know how potent, the work they're doing is. They know the quality of the product they're producing. They know that they've taken the time to do the research, collect the data, create something that is trying to solve for a set of very clear problems, but they perhaps lack the apparatus by which to talk about it and to engage people on a broader level. So you have these great sort of partners that are doing the work, but probably remain fairly unseen when you think about industry as a totality, right? And so where we kind of come in, I think, and just in listening a lot to many of the creators and entrepreneurs that I've met in this journey, the hardest part actually is engagement. You've got a great product, it's well priced, you are actively trying to solve for very clear and specific issues, but you don't know how to engage people or to make them care beyond the immediate value or gratification that product has for that individual. I think where we come in, honestly, is, first of all, we're supporting a nonprofit that is, dedicated to the communities that it serves in a very direct way. It seeks to create pathways to food sovereignty through real action that is not marred by institutional interests. So we offer this sort of just cause, right? This reason for people to get involved with us as a brand, hopefully. In terms of storytelling, right? We understand that in order to create some kind of cultural movement, you have to connect with people on a level that matters to them. And actually, most people care about purchasing goods that embody their values. I'd say that's increasingly the case. Although I also argue that, most people, while they see the connection between the products they consume and their immediate benefit, they maybe don't necessarily make that connection with the environmental impact in its totality yet. What I would say is we're basically creating an opportunity for people to engage in something that they can understand, right? And this conversation keeps coming back to communication, but understanding how to reach people in a way that feels accessible, clear, but also fun and compelling and aspirational. People want to belong to something. And, we're really hoping to create some kind of cultural movement here where we can really galvanize people from the ground up instead of expecting different outcomes through trickle down, economics.
Of course.
And so we're lucky. We have, through the creatives that we bring into the fold, through the companies that have these very large reaches, we have an apparatus at our disposal that allows us, through a pop cultural lens, to take what is a very complex and difficult subject and to make it knowable or more understandable. But hopefully something that people care about and want to engage with because it's cool.
Of course. Yeah, so you identified a problem that was maybe completely unrelated with fashion. You introduced fashion as a way to solve for that problem from a business and economical perspective, or at least to support that problem. And you also introduced the ability that fashion has to create movements around specific problems to make that problem and the solution cool. Yeah. So again, you're using fashion as a tool for that problem that is completely and superficially completely unrelated to fashion, but using fashion as a tool in every single aspect of it, as the business model of fashion, the communications ability of fashion, and at the end, the ability to bring people together to a specific goal in play.
I mean, that's the hope. I mean, I think the one thing, there's so many amazing brands out there, right? That make incredible products that try to solve for a lot of the things that we do. But I will say, I believe that because we're built solely with this goal of supporting another institution and its mission in mind, we're actually, we come out of the regenerative farming space. We're born out of the soil, right? We're very much built with the mission first, and then the rest feels it's important, but it's ancillary to the primary purpose.
Sure. It's reactive to the vision.
Yeah. Which is why at the top of the call, I said, in some way, the vessel doesn't really matter, right? These are the spaces we've gone into produce, highly consumptive goods, because everyone's actively cultivating what they wear, what they put in their body, what they put on their skin. And that's never going to go away. So rather than trying really to dismantle the system, we really seek to create this kind of incremental change in the industries that we've decided to penetrate, in these bigger organizations and industries from the inside out.
Interesting. And what have you learned about solving problems using fashion as a tool? What have been the biggest benefits, I guess? What have been the biggest challenges as well?
I mean, I think to start with the challenges, to conceive of what truly sustainable production looks like in this day and age is difficult because, I think we can all acknowledge there's a tremendous amount of greenwashing that happens, but also most groups are making up, what their sustainability measures are. I know in different parts of the world, different governments and industries are looking to enact sort of guidelines and rules, which obviously couldn't happen fast enough. But, I would be the first to say that we're not experts in sustainability, and we don't claim to be. We work with Dover Street Market Paris. We belong to their incubator, which is focused on bringing emerging brands to market. They try to produce more sustainably with us or for us rather. We conceive of the creative and the marketing, and they handle, production, manufacturing, helping us to bring it to market. And I'd say, majority of the collections that they produce for us, use primarily dead stock or upcycled fabrics, things that already exist. I think the one maybe point of difference for us in this particular challenge is that we don't use that as a marketing tool. We just believe that it needs to be built into the company's DNA to be thinking about this all the time and not talking about it as if, it's something that
it's a marketing gimmick.
Yeah. I think it's going to be a long process, right? Which is why I think working with partners who are versed, have economies of scale, as I mentioned, and areas of expertise when it comes to sourcing, supply chain, that's very sort of important to this longer term challenge, which we'll face in food and beverage and wellness and beauty as well. What are some of the benefits of approaching this through fashion? I really think that it's about pop culture. I think that that's the one sort of pervasive thing that allows us to connect with many people as possible. And I think arguably, fashion is one of those things that people use as a form of self-expression. It's their way of identifying. It's a way of signaling the things they believe in. And, our goal very much is to create a world of products, a lifestyle brand. I don't love the word lifestyle, but it really is hopefully a lifestyle for people where they can purchase Sky High Farm Universe's goods, knowing that the people who made them did their utmost to create them more sustainably, more ethically, but that ultimately are building something that allows them to engage and participate with their dollars in funding what we believe is the issue of our time. And I will say, the fashion community has been extremely supportive, thus far. They understand. And I think actually in many cases, the people that have worked with us have understood that there's a problem for a long time, and they've wanted to get more involved, but have perhaps lacked the avenue. Not everyone could write $1 million check. Not everyone understands the issues that govern food sovereignty or regenerative agriculture. It's very intimidating. And I would count myself among those people until quite recently. And I'm still by no means an expert. But I guess my point is that we've provided a gateway by which people can participate and use their talents for this work. And I think that's why, from the creatives through to the retailers that support us by buying the collection, we've been able to build this at a pretty expeditious clip.
Right. And how have you balanced the need to communicate the larger vision, which is closer to philanthropy, versus the need to create something that's cool? Because it must be completely different, right? From one end, of course, you want people to buy into the larger vision, but at the other, you don't want people to support the brand just because of its larger vision. You want them to support because they genuinely like the products, they genuinely like how it's positioned, they genuinely resonate with it as a fashion brand for now, right? That will probably change in the future. But your ability to persuade people or to bring people together into those two things can be very complicated from a communications perspective, or again, from a creative and movement perspective. So what's your approach? Are you more focused on communicating the longer vision, and as long as the product, the infrastructure is good enough that they'll buy into it? Or is it a mixture of marrying both into one thing? And what is that approach? Because it's very difficult to communicate two big ideas at once?
You know, I would argue that it's actually cool to purchase a brand that is constitutionally set up to give most of its profits away. Like, that's pretty renegade, in my opinion. We were very fortunate when we started out to speak with Newman's Own, some of their leadership. And it's a little known fact that $600 million has been donated over the lifetime of that company's history, which is unfortunate because there are very few entities I know of that are for profit that have given all of their money away. So, I mean, I think that's pretty cool. And to me, the storytelling that we try to do with these creators that I mentioned, from stylists to photographers, our brand partners, Dan is our chief creative officer. We deal with a lot of sensitive and heavy topics in the products that we make, but we deliver them in a way that feels hopefully interesting and compelling. And so I would argue, actually, like, the mission is always first, right? That's the only reason we exist. And then the sort of vernacular, both visual and spoken, follows. And I will say, compared to my last job, where I was very much in dialogue with some of the best media outlets in the world, I got to work with the best brand partners, from the emergent, to the established. This has actually been the most difficult communications gig I've ever had, in that it's easy, because there is no pre-existing model, to conflate the entity of the brand with the farm. They're totally separate on paper, and that's 100% intentional. The 5C3 is a nonprofit, has very strict governance, and it's doing incredible work in a very different space to the brand. The brand is a for-profit entity that has the malleability, the flexibility to respond to market forces, to engage with consumers in a much more fluid way. And so communicating that point of difference is something that we've been trying to do from the start. But also just educating people on what agriculture is, the difference between the big agro-industrial complex and, the regenerative farming movement, which, all of these things are totally complex. There are lots of larger thematics at play that we use the clothing to communicate about. But I think the baseline is to make it easily understandable, to make our intentions known, and to proceed from a place of trust and hopefully authenticity with the people that we're speaking to.
Interesting. So just to summarize everything that we've spoken about so far, and to make sure everything is clear, you identified a problem that you feel passionate about that superficially might seem completely unrelated to fashion. You used fashion as a tool to solve that problem. And since you didn't worry much about having experience with the larger vision that you were trying to solve, it's more a matter of, how can we solve this problem to fashion and at the same time bring people together, partner up with other people in different industries with different expertise that could fall right into place with the larger vision, and us focus on playing our part for now as a fashion brand trying to solve for this problem. And the specifics will kind of like solve themselves as they come, through partners, through your own experiences, through learning, and just going through the process. But again, I think that was something that's very difficult to communicate, is that, again, you are a fashion brand on paper, but you are not a fashion brand in vision. And I think that is challenging, of course, because again, you're trying to solve for a problem that's never been solved before, because it's difficult to see how those two industries are interconnected. But at the same time, it's very motivating for people that are in fashion or passionate about fashion, for it to have another lens to view this industry with, right? For them to really see that they can use their passion that they have in this industry, as superficial, as vain as it might seem at the beginning, to really solve for whatever they want.
Yeah. And, we actually haven't spoken about the business model yet. And I think maybe that's, we talk about, I mean, you have to be doing the thing in order to be communicating about it, right? I always find like it rings a little bit hollow for me when an entity states its desires and goals, but you don't see any type of real action. I believe that the product, whether it be the business model or the clothes that we make, speaks for itself. But, if anyone sort of looks under the hood, and this is actually something that we try to make quite clear in the public record, the company basically is set up to invert the traditional wealth hierarchy. And by that, I mean, once we're profitable, we've committed to giving away 50% of our profits to the farm, thereby fueling the work of an independent nonprofit that is in very direct dialogue with the communities that it serves. We want to allow it to continue to be independent because, as I mentioned before, oftentimes when you receive funds from specific institutions, there are stipulations around what it is you can do with those funds. The next 25% will go to our employees, right? So constitutionally trying to create a business where we prioritize the stewards of this work. If you look around, right, most companies are built on a very clear and specific form of hierarchy. I believe that our staff contribute from the moment that they step in the door. That is much more meaningful than just, fulfilling a very sort of entry-level role. I think the reality is that we're a small team. Each member matters very much to the team. And so I want to see people, regardless of their age, rewarded for their contributions. Also, just acknowledging that the business is really sort of informed by many of the principles that govern regenerative agriculture, and just looking at agriculture in general. I mean, that kind of work is the most skilled and laborious, both mentally and physically. You have to have the technical skill of, an engineer to be a farmer, but it's so poorly remunerated. And why? So I see these sort of discrepancies between, the agricultural space and other industries, but also, lack of parity in pay between nonprofit and for-profit work. And what would the talent distribution look like if the committed individuals that went into nonprofit work that already choose to sacrifice in a number of ways were paid properly? And so acknowledging that our staff is essential to what we're building is I think crucial to both Dan and myself. The next 10% of profits go to underwriting discounts and donations to the agricultural community. Coming off of that last point, just acknowledging that not everything that we make, or not everything is in access, or is rather accessible to the people that share space with the farm, and the communities that surround it. It's really about saying, we want to prioritize these people, instead of consistently only making goods, as is the case in all of these industries, where only a certain number of people can afford them. I will also say that we've been working very hard to stratify our price points and to bring the cost of our goods down so that we can be accessible to as many people as possible. Obviously, having a range of goods from food and beverage, where we sell a drink that's $4.99, through to some of the more luxurious items, that scale as high as $2,500. There's space in there, hopefully for everyone, but also acknowledging that it's very infrequently that these communities are prioritized. We felt it was important to devote a portion of our profits to supporting the proliferation of our goods to those communities. I have some other sort of grand ideas about how to give back to these communities and to make more accessible the same products. A lot of that is through, sliding scale pricing, et cetera. But I hesitate to talk about that in too much detail here without having borne out the conclusion through appropriate modeling. And then finally, the remaining 15% to investors. So really saying, we want very much to make investors whole, but those returns are going to be slower. And it's all about illustrating that a new model for business can be built successfully.
Right. And the model is essentially building a for-profit to support a for-profit business to support a not-for-profit vision.
Correct.
Interesting.
And I will say, just whatever success is, we've already begun to see the benefits of approaching business in this way. With Dover Street Market, we've developed what we refer to as the wholesale donation program. And that's essentially a markup that's added to the wholesale price of our goods. From there, we cleave a donation out for the farm. What it really means is that any retailer that wants to support this work and exist in alignment with this work has to commit financially, right? But it also allows us to center the farm's work in this entire model, which is to say they're not an afterthought or an entity that receives money at the end of a project, but rather we are prioritizing their needs at the very forefront of the process and hopefully the dialogue. What it means is that every retailer who commits to a donation and every then customer who purchases from us is rendered a donor. And so, I'd say success is perhaps in the numbers. We're sold in now over 70 stores globally, all of the best retailers around the world. But we've also managed to garner a donation of, approximately $500,000 in the span of 22 months. So in a way, there is a proof point in that figure. And I will say, we've also raised money through other more indirect means, whether it be through projects that we've done with Balenciaga or Dickies, where we've donated, 100% of profits through Dover Street to the farm when it retailed. There's maybe another 190 grand there as well. So, we try through each partnership to approach the problem through the apparatus that is, directly in front of us. But I will say that on the whole, we've received zero pushback from any of these retailers. Everyone understands because wherever they're from, they have some kind of connection to inequity, the food system, agriculture. The shape of the problem may be different, but it's about as universal as it gets. And so we've seen that people have been very actively willing to engage and to also pay more at wholesale for these
Yeah, of
goods.
course. So people are willing to buy and buy into the vision. It's not a problem of people buying into the vision. I'm guessing it's more a problem of profitability around that, right?
Which then again comes back to communications, right? And how do we make this as compelling and desirable for people as possible?
Right. And is the problem going to be solved into it by getting more people to buy into the vision? So is profitability a problem that is potentially going to be solved by sales volume, or is it going to be solved through just people willing to pay more or buy into more things and increasing sell through on the general products that the brand is offering?
I
What's the
think it's
hypothesis so far? Because it's of course it's you're building a new business model, so everything so far is a hypothesis. But what do you think where do you think the answer lies?
I think it's both, right? You have to scale in order to grow. That's just a reality of capitalism, right? And we want to donate as much money as possible to the farm. We see collaborative product as helping to bring energy to the brand, but we're also developing core products in-house, very much locally in the Hudson Valley, primarily with vintage and dead stock goods that help us to illustrate, I think, what the brand really believes in, right? I think vintage and dead stock are sort of an espousal of our values in that there's a preponderance of amazing stuff that exists in the world already, and it's just about reframing its attractiveness to people. The truth is, the cycle of consumption, which is very much, accelerated, is propelled by marketing, right? And so we can use that same tool to create covetability, to regenerate desire for those same goods. We do customize them to kind of bring in a Sky High Farm touch. But, we see opportunity, right, through collaboration where, we make these amazing products with partners that enter into the zeitgeist, hopefully create a burst of energy. And a lot of those products can then transition into our permanent collection, right, and continue to generate sales. And then we have, core product, which, we make ourselves using what's already in the world that has better margin. There's obviously collaboration and core. And then there's also just talking about what it actually costs to make goods responsibly, to pay people a living wage, to produce more sustainably. I think the real problem all of these industries has is that the consumer doesn't understand the value proposition of what they're getting, right? Between the least expensive version of the good and the more expensive version of the good. The truth is, the more expensive version of the good, it's going to be very hard for that product to, ever undertake the same price as the cheapest version. And that's because it costs to produce more sustainably and to pay people properly. What people don't talk about in the cost of the cheapest good is that there's someone somewhere, typically an impoverished person, who is absorbing the externality that comes out of reducing prices to rock bottom levels. I actually think, again, it comes back to communications, and this is something I talk with many of our partners with a lot, is we actually have to open up the dialogue around what it actually costs to make goods. If you understood the difference between what you were purchasing at, $1.29 versus $3.29, and you understood the world of difference in terms of what it meant for the health of your family, but for also the people that make the goods, you might make a more informed choice or change your habits around consumption. And so I would say sell-through is obviously important, but the onus is really on the brand, right, to illustrate what it is the consumer is supporting and the world of benefit that is derived from them buying that good.
Sure. So it's the same simple principle that's always worked. It's profitability is important, whether we reach profitability by selling more goods or selling more goods to more people. All comes down to our ability to create desire of what we're working on, and that desire needs to be created through communicating the brand and its unique vision. The challenge is that, of course, the business model and the way that you're using fashion as a tool to solve for a completely different problem is a very difficult challenge from a communications perspective. Because again, you're treading new grounds from a business infrastructure perspective, but also from a communications perspective. Because what and how do you communicate? Do you communicate this vision, right? You're lucky enough to be approaching this challenge in a very collaborative way, right? So it makes it a difficult problem to communicate a lot easier for it to resonate. But in essence, that is what comes with having ambitious problem solving. I mean, you really are treading new waters in every single facet of a business, you know?
Yeah. And you asked about the challenges earlier. I think as an entrepreneur, we're fundraising concurrent with running the business. We're actively thinking about how to share the story so that people actively can consider how to get involved on many different levels. And I do think the part that makes it exhilarating, which is that there is no precedent or guidebook for this, is also what makes it hard, which is why I also said, this is one of the biggest communications challenges I've ever faced. But I do think, the ability of the brand to appeal to people on a level that engenders their participation is the answer. I've spent time, in rooms with heads of corporate institutions and industry, and also in the policy space. And, each arm is calling for a different thing. The truth for me is that I don't think you can expect corporate institutions to change, or industry or political systems to change, unless markets demand it.
Of course, you cannot change market behavior without really intense incentives. COVID is a great example. It takes very intense external circumstances for it to be big changes in human behavior. So I understand. And how are you all? What are you establishing internally to solve for that?
I mean, the truth is we're going to have to be in dialogue with every sort of layer and facet, right, of every industry in order to effectively create infrastructural change. But as I sort of alluded to earlier, I see that most people are focused on trying to solve a problem, then hope that the results will trickle down and create some kind of
domino
benefit
effect. Yeah.
But I actually think it's people, that have to be the ones to call for that change on a much greater level. And it's funny, looking ahead at the way the world is developing, there's so many brilliant people that are focused on creating new technologies and opportunities to solve for the problems at hand. Often people are seen as being a problem to solve for. And for me, it's the absolute opposite. I think people are the solution. And I think that the solutions are simple. They exist right in front of us. We have the knowledge and the expertise to actively tackle, through people and regenerative farming and social justice advocates in the food system. We have the ability to solve these problems, but we're so busy looking at, and I don't want to characterize everything that's new, but we're often focused on creating new things to solve for problems, when I just think the resources exist already. And I do think in the case of the brand, it will be people that will help to galvanize that change in the markets, and then by extension in the corporate space, and then by extension in the political sphere.
Of course. Yeah, if you manage to create a movement within your customers that buy into the vision, then all of the other challenges will solve itself, because everybody in the fashion space, every business, every political system reacts to what people want, to what the market wants. And
Right.
if through communications, you can incite that change, that movement within the market, all of those problems will sort of like automatically solve themselves.
or will be confronted with the need to solve them, right? Which is, I think, so much of the issue right now, is that problems aren't confronted until they hit a complete and utter breaking point where, we're all actively being now tasked with solving for climate change.
And wouldn't a simpler approach would be, and I'm sure you've thought about this, wouldn't a simpler approach would be to have a traditional fashion brand, in the sense of, Sky High Farm is a fashion brand that is for profit, works traditionally, but is able to function as a highly profitable fashion brand traditionally, with traditional communications efforts, with as a traditional fashion brand effort. And then on the background, always work on what you've been working on, just not communicating it until it's actually ready and functioning. Wouldn't that solve the communications problem? So like dividing it through steps. First, we make sure that we have a really profitable fashion brand publicly, right? We're always working on the original vision on the back end. And then once the brand is ready, once the business is ready, then we can use that long-term vision to sort of like really, really explode the movement.
I think what I would say is that I feel a real sense of urgency to deal with this in real time. I mean, I don't, I think the problems are so pervasive and systemic that we really can't afford to wait. I also think that what makes the brand compelling is its mission. Dan and I have never been interested in just making another clothing brand. I mean, I know the amount of work that goes into doing that, and the amount, what the probability of success is. I think we all know those odds are not great. That was never our design or interest. We see these vessels as a way to really kind of cogently connect with people, but only because the mission is strong and the desire to create a model is strong. Otherwise, I'm not sure what the point is. The world doesn't need another fashion brand, or at least one without purpose.
Interesting. And what would you say to people that maybe are inspired by the conversation that we've had so far, not only from being part of the movement that you're trying to build, also maybe being a part of this in their own way, right? Maybe they identify a problem that they want to solve, and they want to solve it through fashion. I guess the question would be, what have you learned about ambitious problem solving? What is the simplest approach to such a big and complex and ambitious vision? Is it always people and community?
Yeah. I think it's having a very clear sense of purpose. Without that, there's nothing, for me at least. What is the just cause that motivates you to get up every day? What is the problem that you want to solve? I think a really important lesson is to understand that these changes are incremental. Where I think it's attractive to conceive of burning the system down or existing in total opposition to it, the reality is that consumerism, capitalism, these forces will never go away. And so looking at the inputs that you have to work with and understanding that there are levers that you can pull, but also expecting that the progress you make is going to be incremental is important. I think that that's a more patient kind of activism. And that anyone that's interested in setting something like this up, I think what makes us unique is our point of difference. And so, again, assessing, the landscape, looking at who your competitors are, and then really actively considering if you need to assume all of the same models or traditional ways of working. I just, these urgent times call for more creative solutions.
It's fascinating to see how that's been sort of like the consistent variable in your career. It's, as we were saying at the very beginning of the conversation, is learn how to look at things differently and learn to look at things for the sake of you wanting to change something in the world, right? It all starts with, this is what we want. Why shouldn't be able to create this? And Comme des Garcons, Dover Street Market, essentially, I'm guessing that's sort of like their foundational principle, which influenced you throughout your career and your development. And now you're taking the exact same principle to tackle your own problem. Why shouldn't you be able to solve this problem? And why shouldn't I be able to try to solve this problem through the skill sets that I have and the expertise that I have?
Yeah, which, I appreciate you pointing out. I think for so long in my career, I was very much interested in getting involved in service of some kind, but really lacked an avenue. And I was also working really, really hard at my job. And so, to devote time to understanding precisely how I could get involved was difficult outside of writing a check. I think that it's 100% correct that, my time at CDG and Dover Street has informed my way of thinking about how to approach this business. I think that the other thing is, I'm a person that enjoys working. And, it's something that has always motivated me. And now that there's a very sort of clear personal purpose for me to do this work, but also to marry it with the skills, the few skills that I've garnered over, this period of time, is like actually been a tremendous opportunity for me personally. It's really not hard to wake up and go to work doing something that you love when your guiding light is something far and beyond you. And I would go so far as to say is that it's sort of been integrated into my life and the way that the company has been built. I think my daughter was born 3 weeks after I started the company within the company formally. So, I started in March of 22 and she came very shortly thereafter. And the sort of porousness between home, family, and then the work life became extreme. And I actually think to build a modern company, especially in light of recent historical happenings from the pandemic to, whatever else, I see a hybridity for sure, but I actually think that these things are deeply interconnected. And, I think it's been important to me to build a company with Dan that is the kind of company that I would have liked to have worked in as a younger person, but also acknowledges that life doesn't happen in segments or compartments. They're one and the same thing. And I say this as someone who's privileged to do something I care about very much, and to have the space to build a company that acknowledges the sort of human and community element that comes into working.
Amazing. Yeah. So what's, I guess, very motivating about that idea is that, as a person that is in the fashion industry, you can never, at some point in your career, I don't think anybody can help this. At some point in your career, you think that, why isn't there more than I could do, right? Fashion, at the end of the day, it's just a piece of clothing and fabric that you put into your body, right? Some of us are born with a very deep level of interest and curiosity in those types of things, right? But listening to this conversation really puts things into perspective, because you can truly pursue whatever you want. And it's actually more exciting for you to really look at what you truly want to do beyond just fashion, right? Before, we were limited by just thinking, I want to be the next whatever designer, right? But now people can go beyond that. People can really ask themselves, what problem do I want to solve in this world beyond just fashion? Fashion can be my tool to solve that problem. And you can leverage the biggest things that fashion brings to the table, which is, having that vision. And at the end of the day, creating those communities around solving those problems. Because at the end of the day, that's all fashion is. But you can be even more ambitious in the visions and types of communities that you want to grow. It doesn't have to be just a fashion brand that, brings together people that like music, right? Now it can be a fashion brand that brings people together that want to solve this very important problem in the world, regenerative farming, right? But it could be anything.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's fascinating, because it really all comes down to the foundations of what this industry actually is. And it is just a couple of creatives with ambitious ideas and the ignorance or the arrogance to pursue them, right? But now, if you just think bigger, the results can be bigger in every single aspect of the world, in the word, in the business that you can create, in the communities that you can build, and at the end of the day, the impact that you can actually create.
Yeah, I agree. I think, one of the things that I love the most, and maybe this has to do with years of pitching people ideas for stories, when I worked on the press side more extensively, you're trying a hypothesis or a strategic set of goals on for size, right? And you're saying, well, what are the steps that I need to take in order to get there? And I love the strategy behind that, and sort of thinking about each partner, each person we work with, sort of unique way of thinking and working, rather than believing that it's one size fit all. It's actually about looking sort of tactically at the bigger strategy and saying, how can I get us from A to Z with a very specific set of variables in mind?
Of course.
And I actually would argue, just to take it a step further, that it's much harder to solve problems for which you're dealing with a complete and open sort of open-endedness. It actually helps to have certain constraints in place that you can put on yourself, because then you understand the sort of delimitations.
Of course, business cannot be abstract. Creativity and vision can be abstract, but not business.
Yeah. So once you know what those sort of parameters or constraints are, then you can sort of work to solve problems within those constraints, as opposed to sort of identifying something that's totally nebulous and then having to fumble your way towards a specific outcome.
Of course. Well, and just to sort of transition to the ending segment of our conversation, there's two things that I want to ask. The first one is, and this is a question that I typically ask in my episodes, it would be, now that you understand the journey that you've so ambitiously falling into, what would be the biggest piece of advice that you think you'd need to hear? Maybe when you were starting out, or maybe now even. What's been the consistent challenge, the consistent problem that could be potentially solved by one piece of advice that maybe you could have learned earlier or learned today, but just refused to?
That's hard. I think perhaps, it's taken us 22 months to really precisely figure out how to talk about the work that we do, to find the correct apparatus and vernacular. I think it would, if I had to tell myself, a little under 2 years ago, what I should expect more of and should heed, is just that you have to expect that things will evolve and change. I think in business in general, if you don't evolve, that's death, right? You have to evolve. But I think whatever my ideals were when we started, they still remain equally as pure, but I've had to accept a high degree of flexibility in how we accomplish our goals. And I realized that that's so far and beyond just myself and Dan. It has actually to do with a world of people, my team, the experts that we're in partnership with. Those inform the entity as a whole, which we hope one day will be so much greater than just the sum of a small group of people. So accepting that there's a high degree of unknowability is important. And then I think the other thing, which I think is obvious, is like at any given time, you try to make the best decisions you can with the knowledge that you have at the time. And I think as a business owner, you have to be okay with that, right? The world will change. There are going to be peaks and valleys without a doubt. But you have to be comfortable with hopefully having arrived at the right decision for that particular period of time. And, hindsight is always 20/20, but I think that being accepting of the journey has been a big part of it.
So understanding that with big visions come big levels of unexpectedness. It's almost the same as with big power comes great responsibility, or with great power comes great responsibility. And this way, responsibility is reflected into, nothing is going to be predictable. You're going to be continuously having to learn and bring more people together.
Yeah.
But what do you think has been the most valuable skill you've developed through that process? To sort of because it really is a stumbling process. You feel like you're stumbling your way through that, through everything. But what allows you to be stumbling yourself forward, not backwards?
I believe in the mission. It's not hard to sell something that you are intensively passionate about. Whereas before I used to pitch things that served a specific purpose, now I pitch them knowing what that purpose is, and that it's something far and beyond me. And I think what's a very lucky or privileged position to sit in is to say to anybody that we're coming into contact with, whether it be a consumer or a retailer or a partner, it's just that they're participating in something that's far and beyond, what's immediately in front of us, in the physical goods that we make and sell. It's not hard to sell a good product, is what I would say.
Amazing. And lastly, if you had to simplify the vernacular and everything that you've worked on for the last couple of years, and this will be a great ending segment to the podcast, what is Sky High Farm?
The nonprofit or the brand?
What is the vision? How would you sell it to somebody that wants to be a part of it, whether it be a consumer, an investor, a colleague, collaborator?
Wow, this is I feel like I need to.
Let's put everything into practice.
yes, let's give it a go now. Sky High Farm Universe was built to galvanize funding and education on behalf of Sky High Farm, the nonprofit, which is an entity that was built to generate pathways to food sovereignty. The brand pulls levers within capitalism, within 3 key industries: fashion, food and beverage, wellness, and beauty, to generate donorship out of customers who we believe can help to power the next generation of farmers who are engaged in regenerative farming practices, as well as food justice advocates, with a bigger term goal of instituting large-scale structural change in the industries that we enter into, but on a much bigger picture, the world that the farm inhabits, which is the food system and, of course, climate change.
And how can people be a part of it?
Patronize the brand, engage with us, talk to us, volunteer at the farm. I mean, there's so many different ways to get involved. They're not difficult, really. I will maybe end with one closing plug, which is that we are going to be launching a very special set of products that have been made with Nike Lifewear. We're using surplus stock, so goods that already exist. We've customized them with artwork from Koss, the artist Brian Donnelly, and he has very kindly reinterpreted our icons. And the capsule sort of epitomizes what we do in fashion, but also in the world, which is to bring together aligned and committed individuals to help us propel the farm's message to the front of the dialogue. And so, there's a collection of garments, but also what we're affectionately referring to as the Cloud Force One, which will hopefully be quite popular and really sort of resonate with our customers and anyone that's sort of interested in engaging with the brand.
Amazing. Well, definitely. What a motivating conversation, really. I think that it's important for listeners to really aspire for more, and it's a great example of, the process, the reality behind it, but also the meaning and purpose behind it all, whether it be selfish or not. I think that everybody should really aspire to do something like this if they want to start or evolve within this industry. So I appreciate the time.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about our work. I really enjoyed our conversation, Esteban.